I'm going to give a couple seconds to let people file in before we kick things off. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Wednesday Wise webinar. My name is Sydney Konahia with the International Franchise Association, and we have a great 60 minutes lined up for you all today. Before we get started, I just want to touch on two things. Today's webinar will be recorded, and a copy of the recording along with the slide deck will be shared to all registrants after the webinar. And if you have any questions for today's speakers, please feel free to add them to the chat or questions box, and they'll answer them towards the end of the session. Today's topic is Marketing Smarter in 2026, a data-driven approach for franchise owners, and it's brought to us by Scorpion. Here to provide today's discussion are Gabriela Ferreira, VP of Sales at Scorpion, and Roxanne Conrad, Chief Operating Officer at Premium Service Brands. Thank you both so much for joining us today, and thank you again to Scorpion for sponsoring today's Wednesday Wise webinar. I will now turn things over to you ladies to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here, especially as we think about, can't believe it, that's October 1 going into Q4. I think the biggest things that we wanted to chat through is how can you be planning and prepping your budgets as we go into 2026. And so, we wanted to make this as interactive as possible just because we know a lot of people are going through that process right now with their teams. So before we get started, I wanted to just have everyone join the Menti. So it's menti.com and then use that code 3562. We also added it into the chat. This will allow us to actually, we're going to be doing some interactive polling, some word clouds. So we wanted to make sure that everyone has that information as we kick off. If we want to just go to the next slide real quick, as Sydney mentioned, I'm Gabriela, and then we have Roxanne. It's been really nice getting to work with Roxanne over the past, couple of years now. And so as much as she is a COO, she's very much in the weeds when it comes to the marketing, the operations, and the data side. And so I thought who would be such a great addition when you're thinking holistically of your budgets and planning, your technology and your marketing tech stack than her. So thank you for volunteering your time and sharing your insights with everyone today.
Yeah, thanks for volunteering me too. Just kidding.
Slightly kidding. And so, I think that the way we really wanted to just kick it off is if everyone has the Menti, you're going to be seeing the first question pop up, and it's going to be, when you think about your 2026 marketing budgets, how confident are you that you will deliver a strong ROI? Oh, I like that. So it's good to gauge just to see where everyone's head's at in terms of how they're thinking about metrics going into the 2026 budgets. I'll let it go for a little bit more before we go into our next question. And maybe Roxanne, as we kind of get some polls dialing in, how do you feel about how confident do you feel about going into 2026 with looking at ROI specifically as that key metric?
Yeah, so I would say in looking at ROI, I am very confident going into 2026. I was probably confident going into 2025, but we've learned a lot this year. We have reevaluated our metrics, not just the what good looks like, but what metrics we're actually measuring, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And so, and then reevaluated our plans because of that. So I'm very confident going into 2026 that we'll have a strong ROI on our marketing budget.
It would help if I unmuted myself. I said that's awesome. And, I think that's a real testament to how you just continue to learn year over year, especially as you get the right data sets and the right tools in place. So as we think about, primarily going into 2026, when we were prepping and kind of chatting about what are some of the priorities, what is something that you're looking at as well as, a KPI that you're looking at today and maybe something that you're trying to build on into the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing, the biggest KPI, the biggest stat that we're looking at right now is customer lifetime value. So once we have a customer, what's the average value of that customer within a single brand? We're a platform brand, so we have about 10 brands. but within a single brand after multiple exposures over time. And we've started to build tracking around measuring the additional requests that those customers have for us within that brand, and the added services that they tack on over time within that brand. And so there's lots of different metrics within each brand, but we are looking at, in totality, customer lifetime value as probably our primary metric for what the health of the system would indicate. And then we also, because I said we are a platform brand, we're taking it one step further, and we're also looking at the customer lifetime value over multiple brands as well. So we're tracking that customer not just within one brand anymore, but we're also tracking it across all of our brands and how they're interacting with all of our brands.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we go to the next polling question, I think this is a good indicator because, as you said, it's like you're looking at everything in totality and you're using this new metric to make sure that that's the right metric for you and your business, especially not just as a singular brand, but as a platform. So I'd love to kind of get some feedback from the group. What's one KPI you guys are tracking today that you're not really sure matters? I'd love to hear your feedback here. And then we'll also have Roxanne tell you what hers is that she recently learned. Nice. Cost per lead. Is that just the biggest one? Oh, not sure. Come on, guys. We can get creative. Okay, CPL, great. Okay, awesome. So it looks like, I think this is a strong indicator of we're talking more about just the cost of the lead in general, the cost per click, and all of those types of things. So I think, Roxanne, you have a very interesting perspective of exactly what you found as something that you're not really sure that matters, that you might have been tracking for some time. And I'd love for you to share with the group what that is and why you actually think it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of the people that are on the call are circling around the exact same thing. Maybe they haven't gotten to necessarily why just yet, but lead count, right? A lot of the metrics around leads itself, as far as the quantity of them, what we have found is probably the least important KPI to actually measure. Because once we start tracking it further down the road and we start measuring the quality of the lead or the customer value that we're getting from the lead, along with some pieces in the middle, it tells us a much bigger story. So a lot of times brands or owners within a brand think about their marketing ROI in very transactional terms, right? And we all know this, and we've all had to have conversations with owners around this, but I spend X, I got X number of leads. Or I spent X and I didn't get X number of leads. I need more leads. But what we don't really think through sometimes is the time frame for the conversion of those leads, and at what value those leads converted. So typically, we monitor that marketing spend and a value in a month, right? Maybe a quarter, maybe a year. I'm looking at how much did I spend in January? How many leads did I get? And then sometimes, what was my conversion of those leads? Or for some of you that just put it here, cost per lead. What was my cost per lead of those leads? Well, at the end of the day, what we started to find when we started measuring the customer lifetime value is that our conversion rate, the value of the customer, was very different when we looked at January's performance on February 1st than when we looked at January's performance on December 1st. So on December 1st painted a very different picture of the value of the spend in January. And the quantity of leads suddenly didn't matter at all anymore. It really came down to the quality of the leads based off of the lead source and how much value those customers provided versus maybe some other sources that, sure, we got a lot of leads, but our conversion rate was a little bit lower, and or the total ticket size from that customer was much lower than other sources. So really, lead count is probably the single biggest KPI we just took straight out of tracking. We don't even really look at it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, something we discussed is this is about educating the network of even what quote unquote healthy looks like and what those terminologies are. So as you think about talking to your franchise owners and you're talking about, you know, as you said, in that linear, more transactional way, like SpendX got this many leads. Like if we can just align those cross functions, right? As you are, even though you're in an ops role, you have a lot of understanding of the marketing component because they really do play hand in hand. And so the more that you're aligning those KPIs through marketing, through operations and the conversion, and then ultimately the fulfillment of the service itself, you know, that's where you're able to track more meaningful metrics, which is truly that, you know, whether it's a conversion rate or the ROAS or the ROI, especially, that's kind of, you know, if you're thinking about how to frame this up going into 2026, the more education webinars you could do with your network, the better, so that everyone is speaking the same language and that it's almost like you're aligned on the nomenclature of even what a lead is, right? I've seen in certain organizations that even different teams in the same brand might define that a little bit differently. So with that, I think this is really helpful to understand, once again, as you're preparing for 2026, what are the KPIs that matter and what are things that are actually going to be measurable as you're going into budgeting and your goals and all the things that you're trying to accomplish going into the new year. So now with that, I think that, you know, going to another polling question is really framed around, you know, what area of your marketing budget, right, is now hardest to measure that ROI. So as you're thinking about the KPIs you want to track, now what are things when you're going about your budget that might be the hardest to measure today in your ecosystem? Looks like we have local store marketing and social media. Social media is kind of going through. Yeah. And I'd say social media too, I think is a good indicator of that being a more organic piece, right? Which we know sometimes is a little bit harder to track depending on how you are leveraging that. All right. So this is great. So you know what, Roxanne, as people are kind of filtering in what's difficult for them, maybe can you share a time that, you know, data has really influenced your marketing plan and strategy and what you kind of did to leverage that accordingly?
Yeah, sure. So, and again, I think the audience is polling exactly around kind of what I'm going to speak to, and that is, you know, we've found that over time, and very recently this year, we found that over time, consumers are exposed to multiple campaigns and through various brands, and they might not necessarily be as able and easily tied to a single specific campaign or a single specific source. Social media is a great example of that, where they might be pinged multiple times through various social media platforms. And so it's really, really hard to tie a specific customer at a specific point in time where you captured them from a conversion perspective, right? And what we found in our data told us that we had customers entering in our ecosystem in different platforms, in different marketing platforms, whether it was through our website or through Instagram or through Facebook, or even then sometimes it looked like that they were organically going to our website, most likely because they saw something else. And so we were seeing these same customers entering in as leads in different areas. And so what we started really looking at was that the data told us that the conversion rates for, I'll go back to my previous example, the January marketing value, right? X leads to X customers, they were looking different in February 1st than they looked in December 1st, because in December, we could track that customer back through multiple different marketing channels, and they had a much higher conversion rate. So the more times we saw customers in different marketing channels, the higher the conversion rate. So that started to really influence the way that we thought about how are we marketing our brands and how are we educating our owners. These are very specific data pieces that we can bring to our owners and say, listen, if you're single threaded in your marketing plan, your conversion rate with your customers actually be a lot lower. If you're really saturated with your marketing plan and you show in a lot of different places, the conversion rate for your customers, for your leads is much, much higher because they're seeing you multiple times. So this past year, we were able to take that data set and be able to explain to our owners in a much more educated capacity the reason behind our statements of don't be single threaded, have a marketing matrix, make sure that you're using your marketing dollars and spreading them over a lot of different areas that are beneficial. Obviously, you want to make good decisions with it, because the more places that you show, the more likelihood your consumers are going to convert to your brand.
Absolutely. And Roxanne, something that we touched on, as you highlighted earlier, long-term value when you're thinking about your customer, I think it's important maybe for people to understand, same thing, how did data get you to understand why that metric is, really important to track, but then ultimately, same thing, why does it also tie into this kind of omni-channel approach?
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, when we started reviewing when customers were converting, because that's what led us down this path, was what we really wanted to understand was what was the trigger, what was the most impactful marketing channel. That was kind of our single-mindedness about that question, in terms of gathering the data. We were looking for the best marketing channel, with the hypothesis that some channels were better than others. And what we started to see was that wasn't necessarily the case. And what we started to see was it was more important for us to see when they were converting, not just where and did they. So that started leading us down that path of, again, monitoring and measuring the customer lifetime value. And that is when we started to really open up kind of our data set and our minds. And instead of having a hypothesis about what we thought the data would tell us, we started to just lean into what does the data tell us organically. And the data really showed us that omni-channel, right? Multiple different marketing platforms is the best strategy, because it really comes down to what the customer is the most comfortable with. And customers in different areas go in different places. And also, there wasn't necessarily one or another that was so prolific that we would recommend eliminating one that maybe didn't convert as much. And then again, when you start talking about the value of the customer, back to the channel of marketing that they're aligned to, you started to realize that it's very difficult to say, well, this customer was extremely valuable and it aligned directly to Facebook, because that customer actually pinged us in 3 different segments and areas. And so what we were starting to see is that the more exposed the customers are to our brand, the more likely that their value actually goes up a lot faster.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, the most important theme that you're getting at is tracking data, tracking data, tracking data. And so, without being able to do that, then ideally you don't necessarily know all of these data sets and maybe how to actually optimize and make the most strategy out of it. So before we go into our next question, I think there should be a way for you guys to react, or you can also just put it in the chat. But, how many of you are actually currently using AI tools in your marketing stack? So as we think about, how you're actually planning for your marketing plan, now let's start talking maybe about the tool set. So there's a way you could just put it in the chat, just be like me or not I, however you want to, but just to kind of get a sense of the group's gauge there. Okay, great. Okay, perfect. Okay, good. I'm seeing some good positive response. Okay, for content creation, mostly not planning. Okay, awesome. So I think that, before we actually go into our next polling question, Roxanne, I wanted to ask you this, like, what is your most overrated AI use case that you've seen? And then what's your most underrated one? So I think, we all know the obvious answers, but there's been a lot that how you've been leveraging AI and just automation in general, right? Because I think people sometimes forget that that's quite literally the same thing. Just AI is the hot buzzword, but what is something you've seen that's maybe overrated and one that's underrated as you've been leveraging some of these new technologies?
Sure, sure. So I will say, in my personal experience, the most overrated that I have seen is some of the content creation AI. Not to say that it's all bad, but any that are generated on a free platform or network, they seem to not be able to garner the same look, feel of a brand, right? It loses its personality. Now, in a closed network where you're able to feed and nurture the AI to understand your brand, its voice, its personality, content creation can be a lifesaver. But just using it on a free platform to garner some social media posts or things like that, I think that that's pretty overrated because I think it starts to devalue the voice of the brand. Underrated. Wow. So easily, hands down, is the support that AI can generate on synopsis of data points. So a little bit later, I'll kind of talk through when you really get serious in data, what you can do and what you should be doing. But just in general, to throw a bunch of reports into an ask an AI tool to summarize the data points for you, just to give you a sense of like what to look at, versus a lot of charts, a lot of graphs. Spreadsheets can be mind-boggling. They can make your eyes go cross-eyed. I think that that's completely underrated. Now, I wouldn't necessarily create my entire 2026 budget through AI for sure. But what I would do is if I'm just getting started in this, I would take and leverage data from my different platforms and throw it all together and try to have AI assist me with generating where there are customer touch points within different platforms, and have it spit out to me how many times each customer is engaging with us and through how many platforms. I think that that's a completely underrated use of it right now.
Yes, I will totally piggyback off that. In general, anything trend related, or what are themes when you're putting data sets. An easy one that we've seen a lot of clients leverage this for, um, taking all your reviews and actually asking, like, what are the key themes of areas of opportunity, right? Like, is there an actual person that's maybe getting the most praise, or on the reverse, maybe not getting the best praise? And so maybe that's something too, as a franchise owner, right? It goes back to educating them on things you can just easily have an analysis done on their behalf. And that's just able to provide, either some positive mojo at the location level with that, employee, or maybe that's actual feedback that you could be doing from a training perspective. So I completely agree, the underratedness of the analysis of data and how quickly it could provide you with themes and insights and recommendations. We should be using that for everything we do, personally and professionally. So, I think if we go into our next polling question, I think, what is one strategy, especially as we think about all these AI tools and technology, that maybe you think you're overspending on right now? And you maybe want to understand that a little bit better. So this goes back to the word cloud. So just putting in a word in there, geofencing, interesting. I'll give it a couple more seconds before we Google Ads. Interesting. Okay, this is helpful. I think, as Google Ads gets bigger, just for everyone to know, if people who haven't used Menti, it means that more people are putting that. So there's clearly an overarching group sentiment there. Content also is a similar regard there. And if you think about retargeting, that could also be into the meta universe. So that's helpful just in terms of, I think this question is meant also to recognize you think you're overspending, which probably means there's not enough transparency of data to know if you are or not, because you're not necessarily seeing the right results that you would expect to see, right? And so if we think about, just once again, the clear theme of this whole webinar is, how can you understand your data to then put it into effect when we're going into 2026 and your marketing plan, your budget plan, strategy, etc. So with that, I think going into our next question is more around, if same thing, it's a word cloud. If you had one AI tool that could take something off your plate tomorrow, what would you want it to do? And this is like that magic wand question, if you would. And maybe, Roxanne, while the audience is giving that some thought, what would be yours?
So mine wouldn't be in the marketing sphere, but this is something that we're actually looking into here as a franchise system, and that is, I would have it relieve some of the support mechanisms that we get bogged down in just supporting franchise owners. And so what I mean by that is, and this is something that we're actually actively looking into to implement in 2026. It would be a closed unit where each brand would be able to load their FDD, their sample of their FA, operations manuals, and allow for a kind of help desk chat system. So owners could go in and ask a question to the AI system that pings the FDD, the operations manual, their FA, and provides an answer to the owners. And if it doesn't completely answer their question from a contractual perspective, then they could reach out to their brand operations team or somebody on the help desk, et cetera. Our goal at the end of the day is also to increase that to operational manuals that oversee our CRM platforms, because we get a lot of technical questions around that. I think that would relieve hours of just very, very specific and fairly easy to answer questions, but it requires somebody to go look something up just to verify before they give an answer, plus they have to give the answer. I think it would also create a level of transparency with our owners where they might ask a question to an AI bot a little bit easier than they would ask a question to maybe their coach or their brand lead. And so that would be the first thing that I would put in.
Yeah, I love it. And I think, something you just touched on, it's just the saving of time, right? And so I think that that's a key theme. A lot of people are talking is like vetting initial things, doing some, elimination of a process or kind of reinstituting a process. And I think that is exactly, quote unquote, the AI and the automation, and how that kind of plays into effect is how can you save more of your time to make it more effective, right? So more efficient.
In franchising, right, the one-to-many. So what can AI do to bridge the one-to-many, where currently it's your coaches or it's your dev team or it's your support desk or your help desk? Like, how can AI help support the one-to-many? Because if an AI can do 1 to 1,000, we know an FBC can only do like 1 to 30, right? So that's where I would look to see where can I implement, especially in franchising, a AI tool that can provide a lot more service with a single bot, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's a good call out, especially once again, as you're thinking about not necessarily replacement or enhancements to existing solutions that you have in place or your strategies. Anything scalable in franchising, right, is super important. So the more that you can get access to additional people, not necessarily like actual humans, but you're getting, you're distributed to more people, then that obviously will save you and your team a lot of time. And so, I think that as we go into planning, especially in 2026, something, to think through is maybe what's that, if we go to the next polling, it's really what's the number one barrier that you think is keeping your franchise from becoming more data driven, right? So a lot of the key themes is being able to track all of this. And in order for you to even influence new technology and AI, what do you think needs to be done? Okay, a lot of budget training, technology, all 5, totally. Okay, budget. Yeah. Now, I think this is interesting, and maybe Roxanne, we can kind of elaborate on this. As you go about I really feel like you guys are really focused on the data and you're very data driven, everything you do. And you've made some significant investments in the tech stack that you do for that, which obviously has a budget associated with that. How did you maybe advocate for that at the executive level leadership team when you're thinking through, we need to go in this direction and here's why, and we know it's going to maybe cost a little bit more than another solution, but we know that it will benefit us from in the long run. So maybe just being able to figure out an easy talk track for some people that need to be able to advocate for the investment into being more data driven.
Yeah. So ours was kind of a multi-tiered approach as far as talking through and advocating for, and it was a significant investment, the budget. And I would say our first step in that was we invested in a data analyst here. So a human being that came in, and their responsibility and job was to find ways to consolidate data and to provide us at the executive leadership level with some pretty high level, initially just reports, right? We were looking at 3-4 main KPIs, and then to start to provide us with maybe some insights into what they were seeing. And once we got into that individual, they were tasked then with also researching different tools and technology that would help them be better at their job and provide us with better reporting. So once we started getting kind of that first level of data, like the next, it's like a hook, right? Like you get hooked on data and then you start asking more and more and more questions. And to a point though, an individual person can only tie in so many things before there's no more hours in the day. And so that person was then tasked with researching different technology tools that would import the data and aggregate the data and help them discern better reporting for us. And so that part became pretty self-evident that the budget for it was completely necessary because we were already starting to make better decisions just with the very high level of data that we had. And that kind of dates back to about 2023, to be honest. And so 2023, 2024. And so by the time that early this year came around, we had already determined that the investment into the tools to give us the granular level of data that we were looking for when we needed to deep dive was well worth the investment because of the decisions that we were already able to make prior and seeing those start to net out some value.
Absolutely. And I think that this goes back to the same way you need to educate your franchisees to be speaking the same nomenclature. The different teams and different leadership teams also need to be drumming to those same definitions, nomenclature, and goals. And so the more that everyone's really working in a cohesive, not necessarily cogs in the wheel, but a cohesive strategy with a cohesive goal in mind, it makes it a lot easier for everyone to be advocating for the same thing, which is a tech stack that has more data capabilities that are integration friendly so that you can be seeing everything. And I will say, here at Scorpion, we've seen that just in franchising, that is absolutely the trend, especially with, we've seen private equity money come in, not just at the franchisor level, but even at an individual franchisee owner level. Having data is really what excites them, right? The access to data. So the more that you could be doing to make sure everyone's on board with that, it's just going to benefit both you as a franchisor, your franchisees, and then ultimately whatever your potential exit plan is, like that's also going to add these, like you're going to see the fruit of your labor there and the fruit of that investment. So I think whatever you could do to educate everyone and really advocate for this is what's going to either give you that competitive edge as a brand or potentially leave you behind. Now, as we kind of go through our couple last prompts, I think, something that'd be interesting is, what's like the first thing, maybe even Roxanne, you can start with this, like what's the first thing you would do differently you're doing differently with your 2026 marketing plan, that maybe even is different than 2025, just knowing what you know today?
Yeah. So what I'll share with you is this started kind of the middle of this year. And we've been working towards it all kind of for the rest of this past year, but really, really leaning heavily in 2026. And that is, we're really focused on owner profitability. Okay. So it starts there for us, and then we work things kind of backwards. And so in kind of this whole synopsis, we've been talking about, how do we create a good marketing budget based off of data? And in the background, it's also, well, how do you educate your owners on this? So I'm going to start with that, which is the way that we got in front of our owners and got them kind of to perk up and start listening to us a little bit more was, instead of talking to them about revenue and scaling and all of those things, we started talking to them about their profit. We started talking to them about what kind of money they were taking home and putting in their pocket, right? And so everything that we have been talking about in 2025 and the plans that we're building for 2026 all start with owner profitability. And so when we're looking at our 2026 marketing plan, we are highlighting and we're looking at that data around customer lifetime value, because, by the way, the largest customer value are the most profitable customers. And we're actually able to create some data points around what is a customer's profit on project 2, on project 3, on project 4, as they continue on with us versus kind of that initial entry point. And our marketing strategy has evolved, and the budget that we're putting on some of those strategies has evolved, because instead of just worrying and focusing ourselves and our owners on marketing strategies to go capture as many new customers as we possibly can, we're realizing the value of investing in additional marketing strategies towards those existing customers and towards those leads that came in through maybe one point of entry, and we have to reach them in additional sources. So our marketing strategy and our budget has evolved to be much more omni-channel, versus, I would say, we really, in 2025, we're talking to our owners about, a 3-lane highway, right? There's the local, there's the digital, and then there's the organic or something like that. So it was very, these are the lanes, or a pay-per-lead source, if you will. And now we are talking about, here are the various areas of marketing opportunities, and here is how much time and money of your budget, percent of your budget, you should be investing in each one of these. Here is what PSB, or the franchisor, provides for you, and here is what you need to execute on at your local level. And we're tying that back to profitability. So we're tying a lot of those data points back to customer lifetime value and the profit margins that they have when they are exposing leads and customers to themselves in various marketing channels and continuing to develop them even post that single barrier of entry in their very first job.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful, to share that journey that you guys have gone on, because it didn't happen overnight either. And I think that it's good for people to realize that, like, what worked in 2025 and how you're getting to 2026 really your journey started even further back than that. And it really just hones in on how important it is for you to be communicating to your network almost the why behind everything that you're doing and that you're investing in, so that everyone is focused on the same goal. And as you said, your theme is profitability. And so the more that every owner hears that anytime you're talking to them, right? I think there's a saying, you have to say it 7 times for it to stick or something like that. But I believe that wholeheartedly, especially when we're thinking about franchising, is the more you could say it, even if it's slightly different, but it's still the same theme, then finally it'll start to resonate. And so going into 2026, it feels like you guys have a good understanding. Everyone's in alignment, both from the top all the way to your franchise owners. And that's exactly where you want to be going into a new year and planning in the end of Q4. So I'm not sure if our last polling question is an actual Mentimeter or if it's just put in the chat. Oh, perfect. So now that you guys have heard a lot about what, Roxanne has been able to share with her journey, and, if we think just once again, it's understanding the KPIs, what matters most, what you're actually trying to track, what are you doing today, what's working, and then ultimately what are the other components of your strategy and technology and marketing tools that you need to have in place that will align with the new metrics that are actually matter to you and your brand. With knowing all that, maybe what's something that you're going to be doing a little bit differently with your 2026 marketing plan after hearing your insights from Roxanne. So same thing, just share in detail and then it will start popping up. Perfect. Love that. Shark size every dollar. Awesome. Nice. So I think I just want to call something out in that recent one. This goes back to the cross collaboration. So even if, marketing per se is not in your scope, if your team is directly impacted by what marketing is doing, it's probably better to understand what levers are they pulling on, what is their strategy, and what are their goals, so that you can be aligned with, let's say you're more on the sales or operations side, then you could be aligned with maybe the conversion rate and things that are tracking in your, I'll call them wheelhouse versus the marketing wheelhouse. So just something to think through is, really cross alignment, especially when you're going into a 2026 planning, making sure that all of the budgets and all the goals are aligned with each team. So, your marketing might have different goals. Maybe they're really aggressive, but sales is not ramped up for that. And that's something that you guys need to have that conversation about. So, I think it's really good to think through, the omni-channel approach, leveraging data, awareness. Perfect. Yeah, looking at metrics that matter. I think that's a good exercise. And once again, that's things underrated, but you can leverage some strong AI tools to tell you if that metric actually matters or not. Roxanne, have you ever done that, at least for like a metric, like from a KPI perspective, like, hey, yeah, okay.
I would say we did it late last year, and we'll do it again this year. I was about to chime in and say I couldn't agree more, especially at the leadership level. Reevaluating your top metrics, that not only that you're tracking, but also what you tell yourself good looks like. And here's what I mean. What I have found that is in our brands, we have had legacy KPI benchmarks that we've said, this is what good looks like. This is what good conversion is. This is what good sales is. This is what good AJS is. And I'll ask the question, says who? How do you know? And so what we did was on the brand side is when we started to look at owner profitability and we backed the truck up, suddenly some of our benchmarks weren't so good anymore. And so we needed to raise some of them, and good really wasn't so good. And in other cases, good was great. And so I would say absolutely every year you should be reevaluating what you're looking at, but also how you're measuring it to good. What does good look like, and how are you telling yourself that? And maybe reevaluate what good looks like, even if it is a top metric and it should stay there. What does good look like, and make sure that you're right.
I love that. That's a good call out. And I think that's, this is as much content as we wanted to provide as we wanted to make it really digestible for you all. So unless you have specific questions, you guys will get this deck afterwards. That's kind of calling out some of the key themes that you guys were willing to share with everyone, which is awesome. So thanks again for that participation. That I think, that is such a great way to at least close the content piece, unless we have questions, is making sure that you're looking at reevaluating your metrics, but also challenging the status quo of what has been for a really long time. All right, so we have, does that imply to budget maybe having a shift, being focused on brand awareness versus new leads that support potential upsell or retention? And maybe did you decrease your spend at all when it comes to some lead generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think nothing's off the table when you're reevaluating. I think you just want to start at the highest level when you start to reevaluate, right? So you want to start with what are the things that I'm truly trying to measure, and so that could be revenue, that could be marketing ROI in totality, that could be owner profit, ODP, owner discretionary profit, and maybe it's all three of those. And then drilling down from there in terms of how are you measuring that benchmark? So in terms of marketing ROI, you could drill down into what was the marketing spend last year? Where did we spend them in terms of quadrants, right? And what was the value of each one? And then I would challenge you to try and tie that into customer lifetime value so that you could better understand where the value is over time in those marketing areas. Before I would mess with the size of the budget, I would want to make sure that I was redeploying the budget in places where it would net me more customer lifetime value, unless you absolutely have to make cuts.
Thanks, Roxanne. And I don't see any other. Sydney, do you see anything on your end? I don't see any other questions come through.
No, I'm not seeing any other ones either.
Okay, awesome. Well, if there's no more questions, I can give you all about 15 minutes of your time back. But I really do appreciate the active participation. And like we said, you'll get sent this deck that has at least the insights people are willing to share with people.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Of course, anytime. Thank you guys so much and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Gabriella and Roxanne. Thank you, Andrew, for the assist on the slide deck. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your week and a wonderful upcoming weekend.
All right. Bye-bye.